Hey, this is Evan Marcotte, dating and relationship coach for smart, strong, successful women, your personal trainer for love. Welcome back to the Love You podcast, a place where you can learn everything there is to know about dating, relationships, sex, and men from a man's point of view. A place where you can learn to gain confidence, set healthy boundaries, raise your relationship standards for men. And most importantly, where you can get the love that you deserve. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Before I get into the topic, which is there are good men, I want to thank you for listening to the Love You podcast. We've had a really good month, I think. Listenership is up. We got our 500th review, which is lovely, on Apple. So that's thank you for those. If you haven't given us a positive review or left a comment or subscribed, you could do that on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Please say something nice and share with a friend. And I was also recently a guest on Bethany Frankel's podcast. Bethany Frankel from Real Housewives of New York, Skinny Girl Vodka, the whole thing. She has a really amazing dating podcast called Just Be Dating, B as in the initial of her name. And she had me on as a guest for 2 consecutive episodes. And she's really smart and funny and savvy. She really knows what she's talking about. And I was just delighted to be invited on, and hopefully I'll be invited back. But the good news is we've been doing this here at the Love You podcast since 2016. This is our 358th episode, and so thank you for your continued support. Now let's get into the nitty gritty. There's a reason I'm doing this podcast in particular today. It is because most of the talk out there, including some of the talk that we have on this podcast, is about the dearth of quality men. And you cannot be a human being on the internet in 2024 and not hear about the crisis of men. So many men who are adrift, so many men who are unemployed, so many men who don't have their act together, so many men who are angry at women, so many incels, and we can go on and on and on. And that says nothing about just the very nature of dating apps and just the very nature of life, where my clients are women who have high standards for themselves and for men. And you need to date a man who's at your level and can handle you and has his act together. And right off the bat, that's going to eliminate a whole bunch of guys. And so we need to be able to do this dual thinking where we can say simultaneously in one breath, indeed, there might be a quality man problem. And I give everybody the cover of saying, hey, as a dating coach who's listened to women for 20 years, I've seen it too, right? It's harder and harder to date. It's harder and harder to find people who are in a good place in life. And that might, right off the bat, eliminate 90% of your dating prospects, right? That's fair. Now we say, okay, if we have eliminated 90% of men who are incapable of being good, devoted husbands who are at your level, now we've got a dating pool. And how many men do we need to find to be happy for the rest of our life? 1. So do I believe that's possible? Yes. And I come bearing receipts. And I come with evidence. And it's everywhere. And I know these are anecdotes. And anecdotes is not the same as data. But I'm going to give you both anecdotes and data today about why you should still believe in love, and how you, listening to this, maybe for the first time, maybe I'm listening for a while, might be sabotaging yourself and selling yourself short when you get into that narrative that there are no good men. Because we see it, as I said, we see it everywhere, and we see it a lot of times in primarily women's spaces where, understandably, if you're a woman who is single, middle-aged, and listening to this, that means every dating and relationship experience you've ever had has eventually gone south, right? That's on the surface evidence that it's really hard to find a good man, but that says as much about your picker as it does about the state of men. The two of those things collude to create the illusion that there are no good men out there. I've told the story about one of my best friends who got his second divorce at age 55, and he was devastated. Both of his wives were alcoholics and cheaters, and he was crying, and he said to me, Evan, what have I done wrong? And I told him, man, you made 2 questionable choices, and you doubled down on them for your entire adult life. That doesn't mean anything about women at large. It means something about his taste in women and the choices he's made and the background he had and why he chose them and a whole series of things. So I'm not here to beat you up because you made some questionable choices in men, nor am I here to throw men under the bus. I'm here to remind you that good men exist, and I want to share 2 stories with you primarily today. Number 1 is a story about a man who is unique in that he's the first guy in 10 years who saw through my marketing and hired me to be his dating coach. So I had the privilege this year of taking on one male client who's in his mid-60s. He's intelligent, 30 years, might have a doctorate. He's a scientist kind of guy. Was married for 30 years, but it was a very unhappy marriage, extremely unhappy marriage. And he stuck around out of duty. That's just what you did. If you're a gentleman in the South and you come from a religious background, you keep your family together. You made this vow in the eyes of God, blah, 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 blah. Now, this guy is nothing like a typical Southern guy. And again, I don't want to stick too heavily with stereotypes, but he's not wearing the MAGA hat. He's not following NASCAR. He's actually like a really sweet, sensitive guy who got paired up in this very sort of traditional marriage with someone that he didn't click with. And he made a decision at a young age without much experience. And that defined his entire life. And it wasn't until he finally left his wife after 30 years and very much disappointed his kids that he discovered he didn't know the first thing about dating. So he turned to me because he was listening to this podcast and reading my blogs. And he's like, I think this guy could solve my problems. And so I worked with him, again, somewhat reluctantly. And he hired me as his private coach. We didn't put him into the group calls with all the women, but he hired me as his private coach. Within 3 months, he found a woman who's a widow in her early 60s. And now they're, I think, 5 months into their relationship. And he shares with me what they've been doing together. Like they share what they're learning in Love You from my coaching. It's a really weird, beautiful, unusual communicative relationship where they are both, kind of in therapy, working on themselves and sharing everything together. And so it's just this lovely relationship. It's the healthiest thing this guy's had in his entire life. And he didn't even know it was possible after 30 years with one woman, not the guy with like a ton of swagger, right? He's not like that alpha male kind of guy. He's just a really sweet, sensitive guy who likes to communicate, loves partnership, has a rich, full life, does interesting things, just didn't have anybody to share it with. And so this guy comes on the market for the first time in 30 years, and with a few months of help, he pairs up with a woman who also knew what love looked like and knew what love felt like and what it meant to feel safe, heard, and understood. And so that's Exhibit A, right? The guy who was married to the wrong woman for 30 years who comes on the market. So the question is, are you going to be there? Are you going to be dating to make yourself available to men like this? Because they happen all the time. There's tons of men who made bad choices in their 20s and 30s, right? Who have a ton to give and really want to live life with a partner and have so much to offer that if you are sitting on the sidelines, right? If you're done with dating, and we'll talk about that later, if you're done with dating, you would never have an opportunity to meet this man. And this man is not a unicorn. I could promise you he's not a unicorn, because I got another story from the past month about another guy who's in his mid-60s. And this guy was married for 37 years. And in this past year, his wife got pancreatic cancer, and she passed away about a month ago. And he is devastated. Right? This guy worships his wife. He's a friend, not a close friend in that, we haven't spent that much time together. We live in different cities, but we have mutual friends, and we've really connected. And God, I spent 90 minutes on the phone listening to this guy tell me about his wife. And I usually, have something to say. This one, I just listened, and this guy went on and on about her strengths and why she was special and how she brought out the best in him and how devoted he was and how she was like the sunshine in his life. And it wasn't just some sort of, post-mortem, histrionics. This is a guy who had his world collapse when he lost his wife after raising 3 adult daughters, right? He never thought he would be alone. He didn't envision this, right? But This is a man who has so much love to give, such a good person, who is so good in relationships, right? And he did everything with his wife. He's not like, also not like a, I mean, he's tall, he's very successful. He played basketball when he was young. He's like a great guy, but he was domesticated in the best possible way by love. It's largely the same thing that I feel. I'm not as tall. My basketball skills have fallen off since high school, but it's sort of the same idea. Is I identify with these men. Right? These are guys who want to be in relationships, who bring a lot to the table, and they don't know where to find you. They don't know where you are. They know that you're hurting. They know you've been disappointed by other men, right? And they're out in the wilderness wondering where their equal and opposite half is. And so when I was listening to this guy, it got me choked up. Like I'm a crier. I have to try not to cry on this podcast when I'm thinking of this guy losing his wife, because it makes me think of losing my wife, right? And how I built everything around her, not just this business where, I'm a dating coach, but it's the most beautiful form of codependency, interdependency. It's like we lean on each other. Like we're everything to each other. And yes, we have a lot of friends, and yes, we've got kids, and yes, we have family, and yes, we have interests outside of each other. But boy, at the foundation of it is the world might be chaotic, and there might be issues with elections and climate change and social media and anxiety, and all those things are real, right? When you zoom out. But here, we're trying to create our own little heaven on earth, right? Said by the atheist guy, like, my job is to create the life I want to see with the person I choose to be with. And so it could be chaos out there, but inside our house, in our union, it's beautiful and supportive and laughter and sex and peace. All right? And I wish that upon everybody. It's why I'm evangelical about this. It's why I've been doing this for 20 years. All right? And it's why I could continue to be relentlessly positive in a world that's largely negative about men, dating, relationships, and marriage. And it doesn't have to be that way. I understand why you're hurting. I understand why you're doubtful. I understand if you listen to women for 4 hours a day, you can't not understand. And I'm not denying your life experience. What I'm trying to share with you is that there's more to the world than your life experience. Maybe you've chosen the wrong men because your parents split. Maybe you chose the wrong men because your dad was abusive or aloof or unavailable. Right? Maybe. There's a whole bunch of reasons from beforehand. But right now, if you're not content with the status quo, are you open to love? Are you pursuing love? Are you making decisions that are consistent with love? Are you raising your standards for what you come to expect from men, or are you lowering your standards because you're lonely and you'll put up with any amount of bullshit and crumbs from men? The guys I'm talking about are not the men who are going to give you crumbs. They're the guys who are going to give you the whole world if you stay in the game, if you make yourself available. And that brings me to today's article. It's going to be in the show notes. It's from Pew Research, and I want to quote directly from it because there's a story around men and how emotionally unavailable they are and how they never want to get married, and it's a false narrative. And that's why, again, I know it's hard to change people's minds about things, but I'm going to read you some facts that have nothing to do with my feelings or your feelings. Here's a fact. The trend with younger people getting remarried, that number is down. But for people who are older, I'm 52, a lot of my clients are older than I am, probably a majority of them. The trend in remarriage among adults age 55 and older, 2/3 of previous married adults age 55 to 64 had remarried, up from 55% in 1960. 50% of adults age 65 and older had remarried, up from just 34% in 1960. So back 50 years ago, people were less likely to get remarried, right? Just there wasn't a climate for it. There wasn't the taste for it. Now it is extremely common, right? To the point that it's a majority. Further evidence, 29% of eligible men say they want to remarry, and 36% are not sure. So we're talking about 1/3 of men definitely want to get remarried. About 1/3 of men are unsure, and only 30% say they don't want to get married again. So what does that tell you? That story, men don't want to get married again, is a narrative, and it's not entirely true. There are some men who definitely don't want to get married again, but there's a lot of them who do, or with the right woman, could be open to it. So yes, when you go on there and there's guys who say, I never want to get remarried, I love my freedom, they exist. We're not denying their existence. But these numbers tell a different story. And it shows a pretty equal distribution of men who want to get remarried or unsure, and only 1/3 of people who are completely out on it. And they're pretty easy to avoid because they'll usually tell you. All you have to do is not date them, and they can't hurt you in any meaningful way. Contrast this with women's take on marriage, and this I think will also be eye-opening. Just 15% of previously married women want to remarry. 27% are not sure, and half the women, 54%, report that they do not want to remarry. Wow. So what we've just learned is that essentially twice as many women as men don't want to get remarried, right? And half of the percentage of women want to get remarried as compared to men. So who wants commitment? Who wants marriage? Now, it's more complicated than that, in that there's a reason for this. And I need to acknowledge the reason for this. And I need to acknowledge, if you're thinking that those statistics sound odd, they're not odd, but they come with a backstory. My belief, and your belief as well, I think a lot of men are not capable of being good partners. And there's evidence that women are more emotionally sensitive and blah, 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 blah. It's the reason that women initiate 2/3 of divorces. So women initiate 2/3 of divorces, right? And then they tell the story, I never want to be remarried again. Now, they're associating marriage with the man they married, which makes sense. But choosing a bad husband says nothing about the institution of marriage, about whether it's good or, not everybody, happily married people, according to every study ever, are the happiest people in the world, right? There's nothing wrong with being single and being happily single, right? But if we just dropped a guy that you were in love with who loved you and took care of you for the rest of your life, I don't know many people who would refuse that. So we don't want to preclude the possibility of happy marriage, but a lot of women, because of their experience in marriage, give up on relationships, and men aren't giving up on relationships. So we could say these two things simultaneously. There are a lot of men who don't want commitment, but not as many men as you think. A lot of them do want commitment. There are a lot of men who aren't capable of being good husbands and fathers and things like that, but we don't need 1 million men. We need a pool of about 10%, and we need to choose one of them, right? So all of these narratives, I don't think, are necessarily serving us well when we consider the cost of being alone, what it's like to have to find an emergency contact person to pick you up from your colonoscopy, what it's like to have to consider travel plans alone, or going to dinner parties alone, or going home for the holidays alone. Or you can do it, and you've made peace with it, and it's fine, right? But I listen to women every single day who tell me, yes, I like my life, but I want more. This isn't the life I envisioned. This isn't the life I imagined. But it's so hard, Evan. It's so hard. Yes, it's hard if you're doing it alone, right? That's the very thing that I've come to realize is the unique value of what I do, taking a community of women through a process where they're supported by other women who haven't given up on love, women who've taken this coaching and found partners, which brings me to today's small wins, love you love story. I don't know which one I'm going to tell, but it's basically the same thing. I had 3 clients this week tell me they got new boyfriends. 3, right? All of them over 50, right? Found new boyfriends. And a client who I worked with a few years ago during the pandemic who just emailed me that she is recently engaged, and she just turned 40. So 3 boyfriends from a call of 15 women, right? 3 new boyfriends in 1 week and an engagement. So when I hear this, there's no good men, it's impossible, nothing ever works, I get to see it all the time. All right. So I understand the reason for your pessimism, but that has a lot to do with the men that you've dated in the past It has a lot to do with the way you're going about dating and online dating and the boundaries you set. It has a lot to do with your environment, right? If you're surrounded by other single women who are down on dating, down on men, have given up, right? Stuck in friends with benefits, right? Staying in bad relationships, whether it's bad marriages or bad relationships, these are not your relationship role models. So I encourage you, if something I said today moved you in any meaningful way, please reach out, not for my sake, but because you want more from life than life is currently giving you. Life is best when it's shared, right? Both the great memories that you create together and when you're struggling, and a lot of people are struggling. It's really nice to have someone in your corner who's got your back every second of the day. All right. You can find me, evanmarkkatz.com/coaching. Book an appointment. We'll talk. We'll discuss what's not working in your love life, what you'd like to see happen in your love life, what obstacles are getting in the way of your success. And we'll come up with a customized action plan to identify where you're stuck and what we're going to get moving you forward so you can get one of these good men. Because it's not like winning the lottery. It's not luck. This is a combination of effort and skill. And you've done hard things in your life before. This is the one thing you haven't been able to accomplish. Just know, if you're doing the same thing over and over, it's really hard to get anywhere. You're just going to keep on spinning in circles. And that's what the Love You community is for smart, strong, successful women who are tired of being alone, want to date a man who's at their level, and find a relationship that makes them feel safe, heard, and understood, like the men that I was talking about today, both the divorced gentleman and the widow, right? Widower, great guys, right? And there is a great guy who has no idea you exist. I promise. So, my name is Evan Mark Katz. Thank you for listening to the Love You podcast. I appreciate you if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Leave us a positive review somewhere. As I said, it makes a difference, spreads the word. And again, I'm not like a relentlessly positive, chipper person in real life. What I am is someone who has been lucky enough, right, or dogged enough after going on 300 dates to realize that love is always worth it. And if you don't have it and you want it, the ball is in your court. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of the Love You podcast. I appreciate you. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a great day. Bye-bye.